So welcome at this stage to our audience. If you just started listening now, you're late or you missed this lesson. How dare you? Welcome in. Um, so we're going to start off by looking at what's down here, and this is something that you can look at yourself later. I just picked out this from that wonderful resource, BBC Bite Size. And I've shared this online with you. And because this is what we're looking at today, really, is sentences, phrases, and clauses. You will have noticed earlier we had simple sentence, complex sentence. So we've got just a little bit of terminology. I hope I'm sharing that we need to get under our belts today. And so we're going to start off by watching this film. And then I'm going to run through in this classic PPP style we're adopting at the moment. We're going to do present. I'm going to run through some of the ideas. Then we're going to do some practice. And the practice today is Van der Stor Chapter 2, Building a Sentence, which I didn't put out in advance. Why didn't I put it out in advance? I didn't put it out in advance because I didn't want to stress anybody out, and I was quite happy for us to do this in the lesson, which is pretty cool for me. I'll probably put nouns out a bit in advance and start doing that as well, so you've got them. You can be able to use them later as well to revise. But just be wary of Van der Stor, because that's cool. It's totes cool if you've done it as well. It's all about understanding. Don't forget that if who had this up? One person was very good in looking at or bringing up this sort of idea in response to that. Oops, I did it. Oops, I did it again. Is that this is based on research, okay? And this is why I don't lecture. Because the learning pyramid points to quite clearly the fact that just lecturing and reading is the worst way you could do things. We're then going to use a bit of a film where you creep up into level 3 audiovisual. You've then got physical demonstration in at 30% retention to retain learning rates. Discussion groups, which is what we do primarily, 50%. Practice by doing, which is what we do primarily, 75% learning retention rates. Going all the way up to when you've done it already and you're helping others in your group, peer assessment, 90% retention rates. Okay, that's why we try and aim for participatory teaching methods. That's what we're doing in these lessons, and that's why I shouldn't be lecturing like this the whole time. But in grammar, it's also good to do it stage by stage and go through different phases. So I will be putting out the chapters. It's okay if you've done it already. It's okay if you do it again later. But I'm going to give you a chance to maybe approach some of those. What I will say about the Van der Stor is sometimes I think it gets a little complex when it doesn't have to. So I'm going to try and I really don't know, Annika. I think I just did it as a standard poll and I duplicated, so it should be as many responses as you like, but you should be able to log in with a different name and do it again as well. So we're going to do some of that today as well, and then obviously your production phase for the present practice produce in this PPP is of course in your blog and in your writing in the production that you're going to do constantly and for your next assignment. So let's start off with a little warm-up in the audio-visual arena. Sorry, is that audible if I just play it here? Quick question. I assume so. Audio in? Did you hear that?
I didn't hear anything.
You didn't hear anything.
No.
That's a good point then. I need to look at. You are then on to. I need to change my audio settings, don't I? Thanks, Louise.
Yeah.
I might not be able to do this via. That's a really good question.
On our own browsers.
Does that allow you to? You get that time, Louise?
I can't hear you now.
You can't hear me either. Now you can hear you. Now you can hear me again, can't you?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yes, great. Okay, thank you. Good. All right. Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm not 100% sure that that's even possible. I like everybody to, let's just give you 5 minutes. You can do this individually and just watch the film. You can do it in your own browser and click through the link as Louise most wisely suggests. As a starting point, so we're 12:45. Everybody take the time and just watch sentences, phrases, and clauses. Right. Has everybody had a chance to watch that by now, I think? So there's a really good resource. That's off the BBC website. You'll just find so much that you can dig into. I know there's a review of BBC Bite Size and the website up on the English.usn channel on YouTube as well. There is so much that you can draw on there. So as you can see, the start of sort of sentences. It's looking at ideas of words individually, excuse me, which we talked about when we looked at approaches to vocabulary, and we said that words in isolation are not easy to retain. They often appear, you often focus on content words, which means you miss out on the important function words in between that make up. We talked about word chunks in a lexical approach to language, didn't we? And you can see here that just dealing with words, we've already sort of talked about that, how words seem to be in isolation, but they don't function in that manner. We talked about word chunks, which are bits of language that appear together. And you can see here as well that it goes from words in that little short film, excellent film, I thought. I really like the sort of the analogy to chemistry. I really like the way that works, that you've got sort of words buzzing around sort of in isolation, and then they sort of bind with other molecules to make sort of phrases, or what we called word chunks, in our vocabulary approaches, in lexical approaches. So you can also look at sentences, and you can look at words, and then the next level up is you can look at phrases. But they also talk about a clause. So a phrase is just sort of either a word or a bunch of words together, a chunk. A clause, then, when we go back into it, has a verb. There it is. There's the difference. That's what this sort of organizational unit is as you go up. Here's a clause. A clause has a verb in it. That's all that happens, quite simply. And then a sentence is the next level up, and we're going to talk about. We're talking about sentence level analysis and down to words. And a sentence has a subject and a verb. Okay, so there's some of our terminology beginning to come in. We've got words, phrases, clauses, sentences. I'm going to say it like that: sentences, clauses, sentences. And a sentence has a subject and a verb, very well expressed in that film, I thought, and expresses a single idea. A sentence can be made up of more than one clause. All a clause needs to have is a verb in each bit of it, and we'll have a little look at that later. And you've got a main clause which will have a subject and a verb. And then even those clauses can be divided up into word chunks, into phrases, which is important because that's kind of how we grasp language, don't we? We don't really learn it. We've already learned that already, that we don't sort of learn language word for word. We do it chunk by chunk, piece by piece in bits, and the more we automate those bits, the more quickly we can advance, going right down to the word level. So I'm going to turn now to the PowerPoint. I'll get rid of the Office timeline. I don't even know what that is yet. I'm a Mac man, and I'm going to big up my screen. Do feel free to audio in with comments and help and assist. That's a really good question. Klausul in Swedish, which it might well be the same, but it's not necessarily. Julenissen. There you go. Let's just work with that, shall we? Can we just say that the Norwegian word for clause is potato? Because it's so versatile. Um, it doesn't matter right now, though contrastive. I do like your approach. I'll have a little look at that as well and think about it. But it's more important to remember that a sentence always has a subject and a verb. SV, subject verb. And that was there when we looked at the Year 8 national test. So everybody through to 1-7 is working towards it, and everybody through 8 to 10 is trying to catch up with it. Klausul is probably the wrong translation. It would be a clause, could also be a clause in a agreement or contract, and klausul is the word for that. So I'm actually doing it via English. I'd say just don't worry about it right now. Go with it. Listen to me. I've got a lovely voice. But let's have a look at. Do you want me to? I can even do that over here. I'm sure if you just go into Google Translate, you'll probably be able to get it quite quickly. And you can go from one to the other clause in. It says klausul straight away, but I don't think that's the right clause. Interesting. But let's have a look at the PowerPoint. A sentence consists of one or more clauses, which are made up of clause elements. Okay. So we can divide a clause into different elements. Är det riktigt? Ledsättning? Yeah, it can't be klausul. Klausul is like a clause in a contract. Google Translate will tell you that. That's not the same as Swedish at all. Let's have a look here. Okay, we'll come back to clause elements. Let's have a look. So we've got these two different things, okay, or two different. Ja, det är riktigt. Det stämmer, det vet du. Klausul, yes, a clause has to have a verb. That's its main definition. Otherwise, it could just be a phrase. Clause elements, okay, and these are two different ways of identifying lexical items. Note the use of lexical items there. Clause elements are context dependent. They're function words. Okay, that's what a clause element is. I'm going to go on and tell you about them in a minute. And then you have word class, which is what, if you went into a dictionary and looked something up, would stand next to a word. Word class are content words and always the same. Okay, and that's quite an important little definition there. We'll come back to that later as well, definitely. Clause elements, they're a functional description and they're context dependent, okay, and you'll see why. And then word classes, which is the actual words themselves. They are static, they're always the same. Oh, I'm going through it too quickly, okay. And basically, we'll be looking at word classes from next session, because you can see them right here. We've got nouns, okay, which are people, places, things. So those are concrete nouns, substances as well. But you can also have feelings and phenomena, etc. Abstract nouns. That's a division straight away there of nouns, concrete and abstract. Things you can poke and things that some people say don't even exist, like love. Then, so that's 9 classes, okay, and a noun is always a noun, okay. So dog is a noun, meaning dog. We've got pronouns, which we will be doing an entire session on, looking through word classes. And pronouns, there are 5 main types of pronouns. Personal pronouns, yeah. Possessive pronouns, so personal pronouns, I is a personal pronoun. Possessive pronouns, mine, it is my dog, possessive pronoun. Demonstrative, that. can also be pronounced demonstrative. Interrogative. We were using some of those earlier in the examples. Who. Yes, please do use Oxford dictionaries. And quantifying. One of the things that one is there functions as a quantifier, as a pronoun. Okay. We've got verbs, which are actions, states, relations, mental states, experience, doing words, okay, which we've already looked at verbs, changing from active to passive. It's another word class that we'll be doing an entire session on, probably just the one, so we've got time for everything. Adjectives, describing words, which answer the question, what's it like? It is blue, it is good, it is this, it is that. And adverbs, these two we'll probably do together in one session as well, which answer the questions when, why, and how. He knocked on the door loudly, for example, would be an adverb. There are also 4 other word classes which we'll be looking at. There are numerals, 1, 2, first or second. Prepositions, 2 of, 4 at it. Conjunctions, which are going to be very important, particularly as we look at writing and cohesion in writing. So we'll be dealing with that in our next writing seminar next week. These are some very simple conjunctions, and, but, then, before, if, because, which one would assume would have been in all your blogs and in your informal writing and styles. Then you can think about the fact that in academic writing, obviously, we're going to be upgrading that vocabulary choice to things like consequently, however, therefore, it is due to the fact that. And the 9th, there are 9 word classes. And the 9th word class is interjection, such as, hey! I do apologize. So those are 9 word classes. You would find them next to a word in a dictionary. They are always the same. They are constant. They do not change according to context. So they're a simple description that you can attach to every single word unit. Then we've got clause elements, which I sometimes refer to as clause elephants, but that's just because I'm a very silly man. Clause elements. We've got some examples I'm going to look through here as well, is how we analyze a clause. Now, a clause we know is a bit of a sentence that has a verb in it. So the 5 clause elements we have are subject, verb, object, predicative, adverbial. Okay, you'll notice straight away that a verb is both a word class and a clause element, which can lead to some confusion. You'll also notice straight away that 3 of the clause elements are on the Year 8 national test and are something that we should be working towards throughout all of education. So it's relevant for 1 to 7s and 5 to 10, subject, verb, and object. Whether we then use predicative and adverbial are not actually included. And if I go back to the previous one, we will notice that out of the word classes, just to really focus on why we're doing this, not only for our own knowledge, but what we're going to need to know, nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, numerals, prepositions, conjunctions, and interjections. I think I'm not 100% sure about interjections, but the rest are all on there. Question on the text wall to Annika, who's obviously having a look at Oxford dictionaries. I'd like you to leave any discussion of pre and post modifiers at the moment, because those are ways of analysing a noun phrase, and I don't want you to do that, and I'm not even sure that you need to do that. I might address that in writing seminar next week, because it does have a use for our purposes or there is a particular use that we can put it to. But for the moment, I think it's just a case of too much too much information, and too much to take on board in one go. We've got plenty. Yeah. Yes, I know. We're going to be leaving those out today. My instructions will be that we are going to leave out questions 7, 8, 9, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we don't go into that because I think there is info about it in the chapter, but I think you've got enough to deal with. So I'm choosing to omit that from the process at this point, and I will explain why when it is appropriate. No, it's good. It's good. But just leave that for the minute, and that's why I didn't give that question board in advance as well, because I was considering whether it would just confuse you, and my decision was it will just confuse you. It was too much information. Let's get sentences, words, phrases, clauses, sentences, then word classes and clause elements. Let's get these bits on the way, because we're not going to get it straight away, believe you me. Let's get these bits going and start sort of working on them and with them, if you will. And then we're going to see if we need to do that. So let's have a look at, we're on clause elements. We've also got phrases in between. So there's a bit of a jump, actually. I'm just going to do this and put that. The questions you're asking, I'll do this in order now, sorry, is about this stuff, which I think just takes us into too many grammatical phrases. In between words and word classes, you can analyze things in terms of phrases, which is our word chunks, our little bits. And they could be, I don't know, this is not the version that I was using earlier to demonstrate this. They could be a noun phrase, which is the man I love, which is something I say. That could be something you say, I don't know. That's a noun phrase because that's a subject. The man I love is that guy over there. I said I could do with a cup of tea. There, do with. The with belongs to the verb phrase. And so we can analyze that as a verb phrase. I don't have examples here. We also have an adjective phrase, which could be big blue. It could be more than one word rather than just big as an adjective phrase, for example. Adverb phrase could be in the morning, etc. So we have a phrase level of analyzing. I've got a good diagram which I will bring in here as well, and we'll take that up and have a look at it once we've done this little PowerPoint section. So we go from words and word classes, which are important. The important thing for me to remember here with these terms, the phrase terms, is they're not on the Year 8 test. And that's why, though they can be quite useful because they belong to lexical approaches, one of the reasons that I was going to try and skip over some of this far more detailed stuff in the middle that is quite hard is because you don't need to know any of the phrase terms on the Year 8 test, which means if there are bits of grammar that maybe we don't need to teach, then I want us to focus first of all on the bits that we do need to teach. And the bits that we definitely do need to teach are some of the clause elements because they're on the Year 8 national tests, which means we're working towards them all through 1 to 7, and then we're consolidating them through 10 to 8 to 10. And here we've got some examples, so I'm going to just stick to that. I've got a very good diagram for all the phrases later, but let's just do it bit by bit, I think, here at this stage. So when you look at a clause, or a sentence at all, a sentence is made up of clause elements, as a clause is made up of clause elements. So you have a subject, and here you can see an example of the teacher gave me too much homework, which I think is a fair statement in most cases. All homework is always too much homework. Here, the subject is the teacher in bold. Or in a question form as well, another example of what the sentence, what the subject is. Do you like Indian food? Um, so first of all, we have the subject, and we know that a sentence has to also have a subject and a verb. So those two were sentences. Here comes the verb in this sentence. Charlie drives to work in Norway. So Charlie, therefore, here is the subject. Most Indo-European languages follow subject-verb pattern. So the verb here, so you're getting extra graphics there, is drives. And that's the clause element. Thirdly, and these are the three that are most important because they are there. The predicative is not on the test for good reasons, because you can see it as another element. Object. Charlie packed his bags. So here, as we build up through the sentence, we have Charlie as the subject. That's me. Packed as the verb. What did Charlie pack? Oh, stop doing that. Oh, now I've ruined it. He packed his bags. Oh, sorry. Trying to look at what you're. So I've got a question there as well. The verb is always in second place. Yes, subject verb is the standard word order or syntax of pretty much all Indo-European languages. Definitely in English, same as in Norwegian. There are other inversions, verb subject. A question is one of them. Here you have a help verb, an auxiliary verb, and a main verb. We'll be talking about that in verbs. In do you like Indian food? Yes, I do, by the way. Yeah, we're just about to get to things like that as well. We've got finite and non-finite verbs, but let's do it in its order. We're getting there. Let's just deal with subject, verb, and object at the moment. Okay, and so we also have who gave you this book. I can get that. It's all laid up in an order. So as much as I'd like to answer your questions, I think we can possibly just take it step by step. Because one of the issues here with grammar is there's so many terms that if you start just piling on terms, that it just gets a little bit confusing. Who gave you this book? Here we've got the book, which is being given as the direct object, because it's actually the thing that's being shoved at you. And to whom is the book given? It's given to you. So you're also an object of the action. You're affected by it. You're an indirect object. So we might also work with two different types of objects where necessary, if necessary. Okay, that might be good for your own competence, and it might become important probably at, say, a level of teaching up in lower secondary school, where we're working in greater depth in texts. But up to year 8, for example, you'll notice that subject, verb, and object are target vocabulary, which means you must have been working towards that through years 5 to 7. Another clause element, the fourth clause element, is what's called predicative. And here, in this sentence, Charlie Keeling is an idiot. That's Dr. Charlie Keeling, sorry, is an idiot. Does it? Oh, hang on a minute, it's new glasses. Oh, it says Donald Trump. Donald Trump is an idiot. Here we have a subject, Mr. Trumpingtons, right there. This is not the best format for me to try and get into this text. We have a verb, but the verb to be is a very special verb. It's called the verb copula. And what follows describes the subject. So here, an idiot. Who's an idiot? Donald Trump is an idiot. Audio in if you disagree. So the predicative follows the verb to be, the verb copula, or is in this case, and describes the subject, Donald Trump. The same with your paper is well written. So that's another clause element. Odd Henry, you're on board. You're on board, son. That worked quite well. There's more jokes to be had there. But that's not in the list on the Year 8 test. But there are only 5 clause elements. So it's worth knowing these just as a way of analysing, because we have to work with those first 3 whatever. And then I also think that in a clause element, as we can see, we have number 5, which is the adverbial. I should probably be using a drawing pad for this. I think I do need to get an iPad. They have lived happily ever after. Now here we've got, as a word class, we've got 3 words all the way through, but together they make one clause element, which is subject. They lived, verb. How did they live? In what way did they live? All of this is therefore an adverbial, happily ever after. I've also got in the morning as well, which is a great start to a blues number. Okay, so there we have our 5 clause elements. Quite important: subject, verb. On the test, need to know that. Subject, verb, verb, subject, inversion for a question. Yeah, there are other inversions, particularly in archaic or poetic usage. Object is important. It's on the test. We need to know what an object is: subject, verb, object. An adverbial, I think we can easily, hopefully, identify and realize that that's going to be another element like an adverb. Question on the text wall, but I don't really follow on what you're referring to there, Annika. To be honest, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Yep, all of that is the adverbial. Where do I drive to? Yes, all of it. It's that simple. That's why clause elements is quite a nice way of analyzing things as well, because you don't have to go into word level detail. Charlie drives. Annika's asking about this question in particular, looking at what I'm trying to get at the verb, but subject Charlie drives. Where does Charlie drive? No, it's cool. Don't worry. To work in Norway. Adverbial. Boom. Cha. That's it. The predicative is a bit more complicated, though not really when you look at it. It's just a description, an adjective after the verb to be, or it could be the verb become, which is the other verb copula. That's the static and the dynamic for those of you who are grammarians. But that's not the kind of level of detail we need at this phase, okay? And I'm trying to stress what's on the tests for year 8. So what therefore is, it's important to have thought about all the way through 1 to 7 and to be consolidating all the way through 8 to 10, okay? So this is really on a needs to know basis, just so I can point up that a lot of this knowledge is critical knowledge, okay? But I'm trying to problematize or try to make it easy where I think you can strategically not look at certain elements or phrases or terminology as well. Okay. So then we've already started looking at what we mentioned earlier. We've gone there from clause elements and how we can look at a clause. And we're going to practice this together. So have no fear. You'll be there with your peers in an assessment phase. So we already looked at, when we looked at informal and formal register, we said that, or I said, it was said that informal familiar writing is often in simple sentences. I drank the milk, here being the example over there. Um, uh, I drank the milk. It was nice. Okay, nice, simple sentence. There's a connector between the two, but they are two freestanding sentences, nice and simple. Okay, and that is typical of simple communication, informal familiarity. We don't tend to have very long, complex sentences when we're actually talking to people. Otherwise, they tend to not like us as much. It's very much context driven, isn't it? Um, However, we also looked at complex sentences, and I think this is the bit where we need to know the difference between. I know this is we're already reaching our word chunk max at 10 to 12. We've got simple sentences, which are basically what's called a main clause. What's a main clause? A main clause is a sentence. It has a subject and a verb. I drank the milk. I drank here. And this is combined with another simple sentence. It was subject verb. Nice. Predicative. Okay. So we've got this simple sentence format, and you can see there's this sort of just additive sense of and, then. Okay, you can see it's also almost narrative in that informal sense of you're always somehow storytelling in the context of you and your perspective, your subjective experience. The second type of clause you might get in a complex sentence is the one that's added to a main clause. And we've got some examples here. Yes, Peter. Sorry, I have to do. I'm doing you like the Hunger Games. Peter, come on, Peter. Yes, yes. A main clause has a subject and a verb. That's what characterizes a main clause. A main clause stands alone. It is a simple sentence. They are this one and the same thing. They are synonymous. That's important. A complex sentence is made out of two sentences, one of which is a complete sentence, a main clause, like here. Let's go straight into our examples. I drank the milk, same sentence. That's added to another clause, a dependent clause, to please my dad. Okay? To please my dad cannot stand on its own as a simple sentence. It's a fragment, which is what's down at the bottom. That's a very good example. It's got a verb in it, so it is a clause. The verb, the to infinitive, to please. But it can't stand alone because, and here's where we go back to what Annika was text walling about earlier. This is a finite verb. To please is a non-finite verb. Finite, non-finite. I might add that I am also following some of the structures. No, scrub that, sorry, that's just incorrect. Okay, let's have a look. Let's look at the next sentence as well, because it's got the same thing. We've got it. Yes, exactly. Finite, non-finite. But it's the same thing. I drank, finite, okay? It's happened, it's over, you can measure it, it's measurable. It takes place in time, yeah? Non-finite, to please, it doesn't have any relation to an act that's happened at all. It's called non-finite. I'm going to push through here because we've got 10 minutes. I want to give you a break and then put you into your practice phase. So it was nice. That's just a main clause, simple sentence. It's got a subject, it. It's got a verb, was. It's got a predicative, nice, which describes the it. Then we've got a dependent clause, drinking the milk. Again, this is a clause because it's got a verb, drinking. But this verb is another so-called non-finite verb. Okay, it's not finite. It doesn't take place in time. It's infinite and unmeasurable. Drinking the milk could be any time. So we've got to please, the to infinitive. That's a non-finite verb, and the ing form. We love our ing forms in English. Okay, so the point here is I think this has got mixed up as well. So these are dependent clauses. And we'll have a little look here at, oh gosh, sorry, excuse me. Forgive me for that one as well. We've also got the idea that a dependent clause could also, I'm just going to hop over that bit for the minute, we'll have a look here at this section here as well, could have a subject in it. Non-finite, yes. So if you look at this example there as well, when I drank the milk, I felt good. So this could also be a dependent clause in a complex sentence. Okay, but it's being connected with a connector in the middle. So that's another good example. Okay, so there we have main clauses, simple sentences, dependent clauses, which make up complex sentences, which we said is typical of academic English, okay, and academic writing. And we'll have a look at some of this. Some of these terms obviously are going to turn up when I try and start referring you to your own writing as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and use these just from the first session when we go into your own feedback, which you will get by Friday this week as well. So I'm not expecting you to have a full grasp of it, but what I will try and do is exemplify what you're doing and what bits of the language are what by referring to the correct terminology in your feedback as well. I'll also put it in more general layman's terms. Another one of the features that we're going to have to contend with is run-on sentences, where sentences need to be divided up, whether it's with a full stop, a dash, a colon, a semicolon, or some kind of connector, and or subordinator it's called, because we don't need those terms, so I'm not going to use them at the moment. So we'll be looking at run-on sentences. Here, for example, we've got most people do not like grammar, they think it is boring. This works as a sentence, however, you might want to change some of the punctuation. I'm going to ask you to look at that in detail in your exercises and do that as a discovery when you look at different examples. So let's have a look at what I want to focus on more importantly today. There are finite verbs, looking at main clauses or clauses in general. Go, goes, went. I go, he goes, etc. Non-finite forms of the verb, to go, going, gone. Okay, so we know that they can't then, they might well appear in a clause that cannot be a main clause. Let's have a look at going through some different types of sentences. So we've got a simple sentence. Charlie went crazy. Subject, Charlie. Verb, went. Predicative, crazy. describing the subject here as well. You can use that with the verb to go. It also could be possibly as a clause element be thought of as an adverbial. Or you could even possibly analyze it and say the whole verb is to go crazy. Like I've said, clause elements are not static, they're context dependent. So I can't say Charlie is always a subject, for example. Compound sentence, okay, is when we just link two sentences together that are both main clauses. So here we have Charlie went crazy, connector or connective, and he smashed up the classroom. Subject, to smash it up. I'm going to put all of that as the verb because that's a phrasal verb and the up belongs in the verb element, I'd say there. And that's a finite verb, subject, verb. And what did he smash up? The object, the classroom. So this is could stand alone as a main clause in a simple sentence. So this is a compound sentence, two simple sentences joined with a connector, both of which could be considered main clauses. Oh, sluta. Here we have an example. The next sentence, we move on and we say, okay, what's a dependent clause? We've got our main clause, which stands alone as a simple sentence here in the first part. Charlie was disciplined. Oh gosh, there are different ways of analyzing this. This is quite interesting. So we can say subject. We can put all of that as a verb if we want to. There are different ways of analyzing this as I look at it now as well. What was he disciplined for? We've got a non-finite verb there as well, smashing up the classroom, or smashing up in this term. Example here as well. So this clearly cannot stand alone, which means we have a main clause and a dependent clause for smashing up the classroom. You can also see how with a dependent clause you can normally change the word order, and you could say for smashing up the classroom Charlie was disciplined, and that also works and functions with a dependent clause and then main clause. Complex sentence, sorry again. Charlie was dismissed because he acted inappropriately. Here we have a main clause, connector, and another main clause. But the difference between this and the compound is that this connector is what's called a subordinator, and there is a causal relationship between the fact that Charlie was dismissed and the reason for him being dismissed, that he acted inappropriately. Again, for the third time, apparently after a written warning as well. As a result of that, what happened? Well, of course, the men in the white coats an entire clause is not an adverbial. In this, let's have a look at, if I look at that dependent clause, well, actually, it's not a dependent clause, is it? It's a main clause. The adverbial there is inappropriately, how he acted. That was there inappropriately because it describes how something happened, how or when. I got a little bit put off by that because you could argue that this is subject, verb, adverbial, all of that as well. Like I said, clause elements can be, they're not set in stone, they are context dependent. So grammarians will sit and actually argue about this. And I've looked at that example here and decided that it's actually, you could interpret it in more than one way. Let's have a look at this example. Men in white coats. So all of that is the subject. Came is the verb, and that is subject-verb. So this stands on its own as a main clause and could in itself just be a sentence. Subject and verb expresses one idea. However, here we've got a non-finite verb to take, and to take away is actually part of that verb as well, though it could be in a verbial, and you've got an object in Charlie. So those are a progression through some of the features that we could look at here in finite and non-finite verbs, simple and complex sentences, complex sentence which would include dependent clauses or two main clauses linked with a subordinator because they have a causal link between the two of them. Let's have a little look in greater depth as well at run-on sentences. So the first one, as in our example above, is something that we will need to look at when we do our own writing as well. This is called a run-on sentence. Most students do not like grammar. They think it is boring. This needs to be rewritten. They share an object that becomes, or rather, the subject of the next main clause that's linked only by a comma. This is quite easily affected into something correct by rewriting as two sentences. Most students do not like grammar. They think it is really boring. With a dash, most students do not like grammar. Dash, they think it is really boring. Dash can represent a sort of causal relationship, just as colon does as well. Like, for example, the word because. Most students do not like grammar. Here we have the colon. They think it is really boring. It's a really good question, actually. I'm looking at this now, and as I do this in my mind, I'm thinking, for some of you, this won't even be an issue to begin with. They are frowned upon in formal language and in standard language. So it's seen as incorrect punctuation. As soon as you get out of a formal setting, they actually represent how we speak pretty well, in that we make sentences and we go straight on to the next sentence and we don't really affect a proper pause. So I'd have to say that they would probably be something that might, this kind of form would be accepted in certain settings. There's no question about it. It's just in a standard setting, an academic setting, it's considered grammatically incorrect where you're holding up a standard. I think that's probably enough of an answer at this phase. But have a look at those in the exercises and we'll discuss those more. That will be a good tool possibly when we're analysing our own writing. I'm very aware of the fact that it's past and I want to give you a break. So let's have a look what we can affect by that, or what we can look at that. Let's have a look at some sample sentences for fragments. This is something that will turn up quite a lot, sentence fragment. A sentence fragment is when you don't have a complete sentence, subject, verb. So here you have a complete sentence, USN, subject is verb, a cool place is the predicative. It describes the subject. But here, what we've got is we've got a connector, and we've got another potential main clause, everybody loves, though it's strange to not have a predicative to describe after the word love. But what we've got is a subordinator, which means this clause with the which is not a standalone clause and it needs to be linked. So this is a sentence fragment which needs to be, the punctuation needs to be corrected before it into a comma. or it could be one sentence without any punctuation. So here we've got clearly it is a dependent clause. It's linked to it causally. Number 2, we've got UN supports diversity, subject, verb, object. Here we've got, sorry, I should say a non-finite verb, being, and we've got the predicative, different. So this is a non-finite dependent clause. So this needs to be changed. This is a sentence fragment. It cannot stand alone. It's a dependent clause. And we could do this in several ways. We could do this with a comma, a dash, a colon, or a semicolon. Charlie, subject is verb, one of our English teachers. Okay, this could be seen as a predictive describing Charlie the subject, or as an adverbial, the entire thing. A real character, not really sure whether that's a subject or an object. It's a noun phrase at least. It's on its own. There's no verb, so it can't be considered a clause. So we'd need to show some kind of change in punctuation here. And again, rather like in the previous example on run-on sentences, this could work with a comma, a colon, a dash, or a semicolon. He, subject, works, verb, tirelessly, adverbial, describing how he works. And here we've got how to describe this. It's not a word, it's not a clause. No, sorry, that's because it's been moved from Keynote into PowerPoint, and for some reason PowerPoint doesn't recognize what Keynote does is you just do 2 hyphens and it turns into a dash. So this is not a word, it's not a clause, it's actually what we call a prepositional phrase. There's no verb. What's it doing? It needs to be somehow linked to he works tirelessly. And again, whether we just make it all into one sentence, or we could add a comma, or we could add a colon, the same as yes, most students do not like grammar. They think it's really boring. I do agree with that. Good Lord. So that double hyphen there makes a dash normally when you type through after it, but it's been separated back into double hyphen as it's been changed through the format. Okay, run through 1 completed. We're up to time already, so we really need to put you out for a break now. Just let that soak in, okay? We've looked at, from the top, we tried to separate words, phrases, and clauses and sentences. We then looked at a sentence down to a clause and clause elements. We pointed out that there are static, constant word classes, 9 of them, that describes each word individually. We then talked about the phrase analogy or analysis, which is often used, but here we don't need it for year 8, so we're using it only when it turns up, which we used in describing things that weren't a clause. We looked at the different clause elements which are on the year 8 test, subject, verb, and object being the important ones. So predicative and adverbial had to come in there. There's a possibility that you can, I think, for year 8, you just consider predicative and adverbial. We'll talk about that in greater detail later. We then talked about different types of structures, looking at simple sentences, complex sentences, run-on sentences, and sentence fragments. We tried to look at some of the differences between finite and non-finite verbs, and then simple, compound, complex sentences, and sentences with dependent clauses. We looked at how to deal with what are termed run-on sentences, and we looked at how to deal with sentence fragments. Okay, it's time for you to have a break at 13:40. I'd like you to come back at 13:55, please. So you've got a 15-minute break. In the meantime, I'm going to set you up into groups, but come back into the main room and then we'll set a time limitation, and then you're going to go off and you're going to do your practice phase after the presentation and have a little go in groups with peer assessment of answering the questions in Vanastor. Thank you very much for listening. I'm breaking the records for Charlie talk time today. Reconvene at 13:55. And with that, for those of you who are watching afterwards or revisiting, I'm just going to tell you that for the rest of the day, obviously we'll be going into a group phase and we'll be answering the questions in chapter 2 of Vanastor, Building a Sentence. We'll be looking at a selection of the questions that I put into a survey under modules, from which we're going to be not answering questions. I think it's 7 to 10, which deal with noun phrases and pre and post modifiers, because we're going to leave that to when it's more relevant.